This session is so much going to be about storytelling, about personal experiences in professional domain. For all the three amazing ladies that we're going to talk to today and their stories of finding the right partnerships more than the title q says selling the rights, but I would like to understand it as finding partnerships, the right fit for the book, for the story, and and lot many other things. So I'll start with Tiffany. It was 2022 that I visited Galima's office, and I didn't realize that that's one office in the world that's an entire street. It's it's not a building; it's a street, and it's not an office; it's a fort. So I understood that this institution has stood up for so much legacy and represents such a representative, formidable list across the globe that a lot of knowledge building from the house of French language, literature, if I may call the whole avant-garde thought process that the world has acquired in the last 200 years. Gallimard has played a huge role in facilitating this export of knowledge from France to the world. And once you visit that publishing house, from the reception itself, you get to see these huge portraits of the authors you have just heard about or you feel very fancy dropping their names in conversations. And then you realize, okay, this is Gallimard. Now, to talk to the rights director of that organization and to understand how she sees the world. Okay. Tiffany, if I, from my bad, the acquiring editor at the Gallimard, how she sees the world and how she sees the rights could travel back to the French language and these books could bridge the gaps that perhaps exist. And your recent adventure with Perumal Murugan, of course.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and preferring to listen to us rather than to eat delicious Indian food. um, Thank you for this presentation. I just wanted to mention the photographs that impressed you because that's a lovely concept that I discovered at Gallimard when I was hired there 3 years ago. We have an in-house photographer, a person who has a camera, who has her little black room and her studio in our basement, and she takes photographs of all our authors. And so every 2 months, we put the portraits, beautiful portraits, of all the authors that we're publishing in the next 2 months. So when you enter the publishing house, they all come alive. And every 2 months, we change the faces. And it really, I think, symbolizes a lot of what Antoine Gallimard, who's now the director of, who's the grandson of the founder, really wants to incarnate. He mentions he's very, very adamant about what we call in French la politique d'auteur. In translation, it would mean the politics around a writer. His intention and his mission and his goal is to offer a house, a home, an anchor for his writers, whether they are French or foreign. He doesn't want to do coups. He doesn't want to do one-shots. He wants to invest in careers and offer a long-lasting home for the writers and even an afterlife for the writers that were signed before his time. So we have the first editions that come out in this format, and then we have a paperback imprint called Folio, and then we have Quarto, which is a collection that combines an omnibus collection that can combine a few novels, and then most of the time, once you're dead, but sometimes you can be lucky as a writer, you get a Pléiade, which is I don't know if you've ever heard of our Pléiade volumes. They are pieces of art almost printed on extremely thin, beautiful Bible paper, leather bound with gold inscriptions, and they are quite costly, but some people collection them, and it's an absolute dream for many writers to be part of that collection. So working in a house like that is both very inspiring and can also be intimidating sometimes because we have around 40 Nobel Prizes in our catalog, both French and foreign. When I was hired, Antoine Gallimard told me that one of my missions was to find the new Hemingway. So that's to tell you what the standards are. I am not sure I have found him yet, but I'm looking. And it's also a company where everybody reads. From, of course, the sales reps, but I'm saying, of course, it's not a necessity. I was working in other companies before where sales reps did not really read books. They were just salespeople who could have been selling vacuum cleaners. But working for a house where everyone is invested in literature, but even the financial department reads all the books, it's magical, and it puts pressure on the editors to be up to that prestige, that excellence, and I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah, I think
we are all ears because there's so much legacy, and therefore this is the story that informs the decisions you make. So we are very interested in the story.
I know that one, and then I will. Sorry, a last little thing, but I was impressed on my first day when I sat down at this office 3 years ago, looked around, looked at the bookshelves. All my American heroes of the 30s, 40s were there, Hemingway, Faulkner, Steinbeck, and you think, okay, so who's next after all that? All these masterpieces, how do you continue building the future? It can be a little bit intimidating, as I said, and someone who had actually occupied that role for a long time, Christine Jordis, a marvelous lady, told me, you need to forget the ghosts. And that liberated me because you can't compete with the past. Masterpieces of that sort, I'm not even sure they exist anymore. Do people still write like this? I mean, I hope so, but they're not easy to find. It's clearly not our everyday lives, I think, to find Faulkner type writing. So, so once you let go of the past and you've got to jump in and start building the future. And it's both very exciting, and I think you have to follow your instinct. That's I think, a key.
It's beautiful. From France to Germany, the visit to Zorkam's office, I think that was in 2013 for me. That was about a decade ago. And it was a mix of modern and traditional. That's my only impression I have. And although I could see that the books were so beautifully produced and there were special editions and there were these, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but they were the art pieces that I thought, even if I don't understand German, they could come to India into my bookshelf. And of course, the investment into reader engagement that I understood from our introduction to Zorkam. So I have a very vivid memory of how the publishing house is really interested in understanding what the booksellers are saying, what the authors are saying, what the readers are saying. I'd like to know your take on it, Nora, and how, yes, you are the rights director.
I am the rights director and not acquiring editor.
Totally my bad.
I'm very happy that Tiffany told us the story of Gallimard and her impression while joining Gallimard, because Gallimard and Zorkamp are very much alike. So the two houses have always been in a very close relationship. We share many authors.
Little closer.
Closer. We share many authors. And the idea I have of Zorkamp is basically the same idea Tiffany has of Gallimard. Though I entered Zorkamp like nearly 25 years ago. And well, I think Tiffany, you'll see when you enter such a place, you'll never leave. Apparently,
It's my intention.
so the author's politics or the policy of keeping authors and building them and developing their work and developing a readership for them, developing their voice. It's all the same. It's at the core of what we do. It's the basic idea of our publishing. It takes time and patience, which is becoming a little more difficult nowadays under market circumstances where, like, even booksellers don't always feel to have the time and the shelf space and the expertise to bring the readers to discover new authors and new voices. But still, it's what we do, what we keep doing, and yeah. So, what exactly was your question? Like my take on it, but
I wanted to understand your publishing house's effort to understand the requirement from the audience, from the readers, and what efforts do you put in to acquire or sell in order to bridge these gaps between the requirements and from the editorial office of your publishing
well,
house?
that's very interesting because if you try to understand the requirements of your readers and to shape your program based on what the readers are asking for, this is a slippery slope. So I think what we mostly do is we try to make the readers discover what we think is worthwhile reading. So obviously you need to, yeah, we are curating. We are like, in a certain way, we are filters. So there's so much information. There's such an overload of not just like of news, of information, of intake, of books, of authors, and publishers are curating a list. So what we do is to pick what we think should stand together, what we think represents a certain idea, and this can be very different idea for different publishing houses. So I mean, as I said, Gallimard and Surkamp are very similar even in our lists, but the idea is that the publisher is not just pleasing the crowd. The publisher, a literary publisher, and we are both literary, but also we are doing academic and very serious nonfiction. So we are there to challenge the crowd, to demand something of the readers, and to present them with books that will, without their previous knowledge of them, enrich them. So I think that's, and if I sell rights, it's basically the same. I mean, selling rights is building bridges, and it has obviously there's let's say an economic part of it. So, I mean, a book is two things. It's a work of art, but it's also a trade object. So, and the author is entitled to both aspects. The author is entitled that we represent his art, that we make it accessible and available, that we make it travel, that his ideas and his text, his art goes out to the public, but he's also entitled an income and to make a living of it. So when I sell the rights, it's basically the same 2 points. On the one hand, I'm trying to make a good bargain for my authors, but mostly I'm trying to find the right spot for them, the right audience elsewhere in other languages for their ideas and for their books.
That's beautiful. That's just so beautifully put. Anna, in a country where there is a thing called the American dream, you know.
What an opening. What an opening.
It was 90s was this, and to develop a literary agency and a career of 3 decades into it. To coming to the point where India, from being a country in the shadows, has come out of its own. It's It's not the newly independent India that it was in 80s and 90s, and now it's slightly more evolved and noisy. So, what are your experiences of building a list in a country where almost all the global publishing boils down? The giants are available, the independents are available. How do you curate? What's your process? What's your secret sauce?
So I will say, like, just something about the American publishing industry, since both of them have spoken about their countries. American publishing is massive. It is the biggest in the world, which means many things. But briefly, right now, I mean, it also had its origins as publishers. It was a gentleman's profession, much like Mr. Gallimard. It was Monsieur Gallimard. It was Mr. Knopf and Mr. Simon and Mr. Schuster who had who set up their publishing houses, and mostly it was a fairly rarefied profession and a fairly rarefied way of publishing books. And if we fast forward to now, there are 5 major publishing houses in the United States, and they are large multinational corporations. Simon and Schuster is, or I should say, Penguin Random House is a huge one, is the biggest one, and Hachette, which is actually a French company, and Penguin Random House is owned by Bertelsmann, which is a German company, but they have many things. They don't just have publishing houses, but they have other things. So they're giant multinational houses at this point. At some level, the identities of publishers that we know, like Vintage and Scribner and all, exist still. Those used to all be independent houses. But we have to understand it is a very corporate world for the big major houses. But we also have lots of other kinds of houses. We have a lot of independent presses. We have university presses. There's a whole broad range. And many, many, many books are published in the United States. Most of them are generated in the United States by American authors or other authors writing in the English language. And then many of them are sold in translation all over the world. So I sort of started out, and I grew up in India, so I've always had like I think my beginning, I had to understand what American readers wanted, which I had not even really read at that time. Like, sort of the greats were the Saul Bellows and the generation that just passed. And when I started, it was all the Jonathans, Jonathan Franzen and Jonathan. Anyway, so, but it has evolved a lot. And I was always trying to find my place in it, which was a way. I had just had a much more international upbringing and was much more interested in bringing in more diverse voices and international voices. And I do at present do mostly nonfiction with an odd novel every now and then. It's actually because I love to read fiction, and so I just keep it separate. I can read all the novels I want now if I'm not looking for submissions. And so it was a bumpy ride. There was actually one quite well-known Indian publisher of Knopf, Sunny Mehta, when I started, and there was one other. In fact, my very first few days in publishing, I got a call from an Indian editor who said, "I heard you're Indian." So there were 3 of us, and that's how I got to know her. And so it's a little. I remember I made my first trip to India and met many of the editors here. But I think the panel before this, we talked about how publishing used to be in India as well and has changed a lot. And I tried to sell some of those books, and it was difficult. But I was able to start selling books that had. I think I sold one of the first nonfiction books that really addressed the Indian diaspora. It was called Leaving India, and it was a memoir through her family. And I had to explain to editors, the Indian diaspora is as huge as like the Jewish diaspora or the Chinese diaspora, and it has its own really fascinating history. Over time, I sold other books. I sold a book by another speaker who's going to be here, Anu Chopra, about Bollywood, about Shah Rukh Khan. But I had to explain to them the scale of Bollywood and how just like bigger than Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, all of those people, how huge Shah Rukh Khan was. And like through his story, how much you could understand about not just the Indian culture in India, but the diaspora culture, because people learned about India through Bollywood. So that was a book about that. I sold a book called The Music Room by Namita Devi Dayal, which was about Indian music, which people did know in the US via Ravi Shankar and the Beatles and Zakir Hussain and all that. But, like an understanding of how music works, what it means, the traditions, the guru and the student tradition, the tradition of the gharanas, really how it's a spiritual practice. And all of that was, I thought, beautifully rendered in her book. Then like moving forward, like I did a book recently by Siddharth Dubey, which was about growing up in India, but it was his work just with, one, growing up being gay and how difficult that was in India. And then his work working with some of the most downtrodden people in India, Indian society, trans people, sex workers, and all of that. But it was a book that ultimately, I was able to sell it in the US, but to an Indian American queer editor. I was like, you have to buy this. And then another book a fiction was by Deepak Unnikrishnan. It was literally the first book I had read about the experience of Indians in the UAE, what's that? It's a beautiful book. It was published here. All of these were published here as well. So I've done books with, I'm not going to go through all of them. Relax. Most of my list is a lot of other things as well. Like I love science. I love history. I love memoir, current affairs, journalism. So it's a broad range of books. I have a book coming out about Einstein's spiritual journey. And so lots of different types of books. But to answer your question, I do think like I hope I've illustrated how a person's personal taste can actually help bring certain kinds of books out in the world. Like these are books that I really did feel like I was translating to the American audience why this might be of interest to them, even though it seemed like it was
explaining Shah Rukh Khan to them.
I was explaining Shah Rukh Khan to them. I sent these big glossies of him, as well as I think Dilwale Dulhan. No, which one? No, I sent one of their movies to them to watch if they wanted to. Just so that they could get an idea of who he was.
Quite a bit of homework.
I did, yeah.
So to start the second round of this discussion, I think I'll come back to each one of you, asking about one hit and one miss. And because through your experiential knowledge, maybe we'll be able to understand now how this rights translation matchmaking really happens. One book that gives you a sheer joy, and one book that maybe made you think, we really wanted it to work well, but it didn't. So I'll start with you, Tiffany, again.
Okay, I'm not prepared for this. I need a couple seconds.
Do you mean like a commercial hit, or do you just mean something that felt like a hit?
Both ways.
Okay.
It's the commercial and the...
Like you don't necessarily want the New York Times bestseller.
No.
Okay.
Well, I think I'm going to skirt around your question. I'm sorry. Because I think that the worst possible thing to want is to create a hit. It's a recipe for disaster when you start saying, I'm telling your colleagues, this is going to be a hit. It's guaranteed. I know this is a hit.
What I meant is
okay.
that has really worked, that you've commissioned and it's really worked. Yes.
Well, I've only been there for 3 years, so I'm still building. The list, and we have very prolific authors. I'm very lucky to be working with many grand authors. I would say there's actually one more commercial title, because once a year I allow myself a slightly more commercial title, and there's this American novel called The Family by Naomi Kropitsky that was published by Penguin. And it looked like a very commercial, uber commercial title, but it spoke about a friendship, the friendship of two little girls growing up in Brooklyn in an Italian area, and having two fathers who were part of the mafia. So two friends, neighbors, evolving in the violence of these men, promising each other that they will not replicate what their mothers endured, and who end up following the same path. And I was astonished that this book had not sold in France and had sold in multiple places. This is called The French Exception. It happens all the time that books sell all around the world and not France. But trust me, when agents sell a book first in France, they panic. They think, oh, am I cursed? Will I not sell it anywhere else now? So I got hold of this book that was packaged very commercially in the US and in most countries. And I actually found that the writing was charming, was elegant, had a wonderful flow, and that she deserved credit for her style. And so I think that can be a good combination sometimes, a very, very story-driven novel with dignified quality writing that is not, that is accessible. That can be with a brand like Gallimard, it can work wonders. So that was a success for us. And it was a very, very cheap acquisition because no one had wanted it in France. So that's a good deal. And then, I don't want to talk about a flop.
Give us the reasons, probably in afterthought, that you thought, why it didn't work the way we wanted it to work, probably.
Well, there's something terrible in France. It's timing. We have two concentrations. Most countries don't have that. That's another French exception. We concentrate most of our literary publications in September, end of August, September. So when everybody comes back from vacation, needs to go back to work, kids go back to school, everyone is super busy. 500 novels published the same week. Oh. Nobody can understand why we're doing that, and everybody complains about it. But every year we start it all over again, and the reason why originally was that all the fall prices are lined up. So if you want to if you want your books to be incorporated in the selections, you have to be published at that season. But the numbers keep growing, and so we used to have January that gave us more oxygen. Actually, this year in January, we published as many books as in our last rentrée. And then people tell you, colleagues, sales, colleagues from the commercial team, they say, you can't publish a book in June, you can't publish a book in May. Literary books need to be published in January and September. And I find that the pressure around scheduling a book is difficult. So that's yes, I think bad timing for a book, or publishing a new voice in a very crowded time is risky and can hurt publication.
That's very well said. Coming to you, Nora.
Well, in the rights trade, I have three kind of big hits. Like, one is like my big name authors publish a new book, and this is like it's running. You don't need to do a lot. The second is, over the last years we developed quite a strong list of international authors that I represent, like from the Polish, from the Russian. This is not something that happened now, so we're doing this since like 20 years, but the list is growing. And like over the last years, I realized that, for example, like my Russian author, Maria Stepanova, she has become really an international star. Like, I'm not talking about huge numbers, but I'm talking about like 20, 30 translations and the best publishing houses lining up in order to translate her. Or Benjamin Labatut, like a Chilean author. We represented the rights to his first novel, which was a huge success. And so there's this international list. Serhiy Shadan, like the foremost Ukrainian author whom we represent since like 15 years. This the second. And then every now and then we succeed to really build from a scratch a very, very nice success with German literary and non-literary authors, like non-fiction and literary. Never with the commercial. Like what is not selling from Germany, talking about flops. Nobody needs German commercial books, and nobody needs German crime and thriller. I mean, not from my list. Obviously, there are big commercial authors in Germany that sell, but that's not our expertise. That's not what editors are looking for when they meet with me.
I do understand that the German creamy, if I'm pronouncing it right, that's what I was told when I was touring the German publishing market, that there were bookstores dedicated to the crime books, and they would have the crime setting. They would do the decor like that, and they would have special readings from the set that was looking like a prison. So I saw there was so much investment in and interest in promoting the crime fiction, but somehow it was so local, it was so embedded in the German ethos that even if we tried to look at its translation, for example, in Hindi for me, I could not find synergy in our part of the world. So that's you very pointed out very well that this is but what really works from Germany, by the way, is the literature that talks about the concentration camps. We still are we are so hungover, Herta Müller's Atem Schaukel, for example, which was translated into Hindi as Bhuk ka Vyakran, the grammar of hunger, to loosely translate it into English. It's still, if not a commercial success, but it's a referred to book for talking about the literature, because we have a history of partition, and the historical. Yeah.
Well, obviously there are two German main topics, both historical, like it's Second World War and the Holocaust, and then it's the division and the wall. And both those topics are, I often think those are over narrated and there's nothing new coming. But then, as you've seen with the recent booker for Jenny Erpenbeck, Kairos, right, there are new books coming and gaining an audience all the time. So yes, it's it's both very German, very German
yes.
topics.
Very, very bang on there. Over to you, Anna.
Since I represent my writers, they're all hits. Like if I have found them a home, it's a hit.
But you still have to tell us.
What would you like me to
Well, you still have to tell how did you finally crack the Shah Rukh Khan book?
So
how did you?
Oh, I mean, in terms
and of course,
how
Namita Devi Dayal, it's an interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, they're all about just finding somebody who would be a match for it. I always feel like in order to have diverse books, you actually you need to have diverse people working in the industry to to understand it. And this is an issue that we talk about periodically in the US as well, mostly referring to like the African American and the Hispanic communities, because it is still a fairly homogenous industry in terms of class and where people come from, and I think in order to have diversity, and it's similar to India in that sense, where we have so many different types of people. I've completely lost the thread of your question, but So it requires a lot of creativity. I always think it's a match between the material and the editor. And there is the secret sauce of timing, like something, and I think you want to be a little bit ahead of things and not too ahead of things. Like by the time it's a trend, it's over. So I'm always looking for something that feels fresh. And the world is big, experiences are big, the ability to put things into words on the page is endless in terms of possibility. So, and I think we're living in a much more connected world where, stories can take place all over the world. Stories can be told in different ways. The influences are huge, anything. I mean, we have a global culture of social media. You could be, kids listen to K-pop. They do they love Japanese anime. It's a mixed world now where I think interesting things are happening all the time. And that's kind of what I'm looking for, something that
It's a process.
feels, yeah.
So we'll open the session for discussions, queries, comments. Many one of you. Yes.
I'm wondering if graphic novels and illustrated books face different challenges when it comes to translating and rights across borders.
Can you repeat the beginning of your question, please?
Graphic novels and illustrated books, are there specific challenges that are unique to those books?
So I can't answer this one.
Well, like graphic novels, it depends on how they are visualized. So we sometimes have the problem. I'm not an expert. We do graphic novels, but not so many. So my knowledge is limited. But we do have the problem that the translation might not fit the space on the page, in the bubble or on the image any longer, which is quite a problem in some languages. No, but I think that's the only specific. I mean, then there are like technical in the illustrated books trade. I mean, much of the bigger illustrated books are published in cooperation, like in co-publishing situations, which makes for different handling, and you need to sell the rights beforehand, and then publishers are put together to print the book all 15 languages in one setting. But so that's a different rights trading and a different production line. But no, that's it.
We have one more question.
Good afternoon. My name is Ishan. I want to know what are the prospects, or what is the future of books on modern science, philosophy, and religion. When you are doing research and connecting, for example, like when you read some book, erstwhile book of a great philosopher, right, 2,000 years old or 1,000 years old, then you compare it with modern science and all, modern philosophies and modern philosophers. So if you write such book, a research book, right, what are the prospects, what is the scope? And what I have seen is not much work is done in that area. Like you are comparing an old book with the modern technologies. You got my point, right? Old scholars.
No. Sorry, you're speaking from the space of an author.
Yeah.
So as an author, if you write books on spirituality, how do you see global market opening up for you?
Not just spirituality. You are mixing spirituality with the modern science. You got me?
So you are exploring a genre where you are trying to compare spirituality and modern science, is it?
Yeah, mixing it in some way.
Okay. So it's fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction.
And you want to see how the global publishing can take your book in for translations, etc. Okay.
What do you think about it, and what are the prospects and scopes?
And to whom is it addressed to?
I'll take it.
All of them. It's to all of them.
Okay.
We agreed. I was going to say that I think it's an excellent area, and I actually worked on a very interesting book, which has not been published here, but has been published in America. It's called Waking, Dreaming, Being, and it's literally, I think the science and spirituality space is actually quite vibrant. I mean, there have been a number of books about it in the US anyway, which is what I can speak to. But this book is about somebody who did look at the traditions from the East mostly and compared it to what we know from neuroscience. And it's exactly the type of book you're talking about. It's fairly high level as it's written by a philosopher, but it is a seminal book. This author is a seminal writer. His name is Evan Thompson. So there's such a range of books on the space, depending on who you're writing it for. I think it's all the rage in a lot of ways because we're always looking for like science to back up wisdom, but the quality of it varies very much.
Well, and if I may add something, in this area of publishing, the name you bring in is very important, like from which position you're writing. Like most of this kind of nonfiction publishing requires a lot of authority. So you usually need to have like a certain position in the academia or in the public already, like being a well-known journalist, being a scientist, being as you said, a philosopher. It's not easy to break out like from no platform,
no
with
expertise.
such a high.
Yeah.
So maybe you have the expertise, but you're not
recognized
for having it. Then it's very difficult to break out with such a kind of book.
We have only 1.5 minutes. Quickly. Yes.
My question is to all three of you because you are multinational corporations yourself, the companies that you represent, also pedigree of this table, right? How easy is it for a novice author to get in touch with you? Or do you also now have systems where there are only literary agents? You know, very simply, 20 years ago, Tara Books could go to the Frankfurt Book Fair and get picked up. You know, is there something that's possible today, or there's just one streamline or a pipeline that
was one of the questions I wanted to get. Yeah.
No, I think we're all open to direct submissions. The only thing that I personally can't do is that I cannot publish an author who has not been published in his country of origin. So when there are many international writers who get hold of my email address and who send me manuscripts, and when I ask them, so who's your publisher in your country? And they say, nobody. That's impossible for me because I can't present then to my sales reps, to booksellers, an author who has not built anything in his own country of origin. So that's my only limit, I would say.
Don't go to Frankfurt as an author to present your book. Don't go to book fairs to present your book personally, because book fairs, I mean, there are different kind of book fairs, like the ones that are solely or mostly professional, and then the ones that are open to the public to buy books, but to really buy books. But none of the editors or publishers that attend book fairs to do business are there to do direct business with authors. So this is a waste of time and money. You will not meet anybody who has the time and the headspace to talk to you.
It's a very B2B space. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Agreed.
Thank you.